My name is Tad Retz. I'm a landscape painter in upstate New York. Today I'm going to walk you through my process for creating a gouache painting. I wanted to center this tutorial video around the idea of taking a less than ideal photo reference and improving on it by moving things around, changing the value of things along those lines. This has been a big part of how I work recently, and I wanted to show you how liberating it can be. You can see my work on my website, tadretz.com, and I'm also on Instagram. If you just search at Tad Retz, you'll see my work. Okay, so my colors that I'm using are titanium white gouache. This is a azo yellow deep spectrum red, and this is an ultramarine blue, and then this is a cerulean blue, which I'll really only use to get that really nice, like warm, sunny sky, that like warm light blue. Right here I've got just a spray bottle, keep it right here just to keep things from drying out. And for brushes, I use a big 1-inch flat. These are all kind of old, but they do the trick. This brush is a Princeton Ermine 600R size 8. This is a 1/2-inch flat, and this is just a skinny, similar to this one, smaller size rigger brush. I use this for some slight outlining or if I need to suggest detail. I like how this scene gives me a lot to work with. It got a lot of nice big shapes, and I like how the sky has interest in it with those clouds. I think I want to keep it mostly sky. And I want to get rid of the road. I don't think the road is important to the scene. I'll have it a nice sunny, snowy foreground. So I like this shape of brush over here. And then I think I'm going to put the barn, maybe I'll bring it down a little bit more. And I don't like when a photo kind of cuts the roof like that. It's a little awkward. So I think I will change that angle a little bit. I think I want the snow to be down there like that. I like that angle on that roof. And I know the barn continues. It kind of does this again over here like this. But that's not necessary. I want to have the barn kind of continue into that brush. I like how that all kind of reads as the same shape. These little tree type things over here. So I'll have the barn kind of fade into that. And there's some in the foreground of the barn too, like that. So that's kind of how the barn is. And I might suggest, I like the sign in there. I might suggest little bits of detail like that. The sign isn't really gonna make sense right there because I'm leaving the road out, but I'll put in little shapes of color and suggest that there's kind of some junk scattered around, because barns always have some equipment laying out front and stuff. I always like that about them. So I have a lot of angles going down like this. I've got the ground plane going like that, and I've got the angles of the roof going down like that. I do have this angle, which is good to counter that, but I think I want to counter it more. I like the clouds, but I don't like the angle that they're going, so I'm going to do kind of what the clouds are doing and add those in, but I'm going to make them go in the opposite direction. And what this will do is balance out these harsh angles going like this with the angles going like this. So I'll have a nice balance with the movement of the piece. And this area of brush over here will be a nice place for the eye to kind of stop following this movement. So I'll have some of those taller pieces probably pointing back up. You can see how I cleaned my palette. I wiped off a lot of the extra paint, but I left some areas of muddy color. Those will be helped to kind of gray down some of these mixtures that I'm doing. Like over here, that area, I can mix in that red and it kind of cools it down a little bit, makes it less saturated. I want to get Get that big shape in. That continues through, I think, over here. That way I keep the big shape of value, but it's broken into different textures and individual objects. So it'll be a little bit more interesting to look at. Like that, I can already tell is probably too dark. Maybe. I'll get a little bit lighter and I'll add a little bit of yellow into that. Maybe a little bit of red as it comes down towards the horizon. I'm gonna leave some of those shapes of cloud just as the white, just to get an idea for composition and if it's working or not. Get even lighter down here. Lighter and more yellow. Still all pretty dark. Not really dark on me, but the shape of dark that I put in is still pretty light in value when you think about it, so I can always go back in and darken that more. I might put in those shadow shapes first before I mess with that sunlit side, because it might actually read well once I get those dark, crisp shadows from the roof line. I'm gonna make up a couple shadows because I know I'm gonna put a couple things down here. When you squint at the painting and then squint at the photo, the breakup of values are similar now. So the roof, I'm gonna do as like a yellowish sunlit, probably aluminum roof. I'm gonna kind of do a gray yellow just to get something down. When you look at that roof, it's warmer than the sky and it's a little bit brighter. Suggest that early on. Try to get rid of as much of those white shapes in the painting as possible, unless it's important to. For example, if it was the brightest spot in the painting, I might want to leave it as the straight white for a little while, just so I have it to compare some of the darker areas. I'm gonna start painting in those clouds again and just make some of those shapes a little bit more realistic. From experience, I know snow tends to be brighter than the whites of the clouds. So I'm going to think of those clouds as more of a gray. And now I can carve back in with a little bit of that sky color and try to figure out how I want to design those shapes up there. I want to have some sharp angles, but clouds in general have a lot of soft edges, so I want to leave some of those nice like watered down edges. And as I move down, I got to remember to keep lightening and warming up that blue. Big part of my painting is overlapping layers, overlapping shapes to get a textured, cohesive, natural edge to things. So I have some nice darks on the barn, but this stuff is in the foreground in front of this. So I want to have some darks in here. When I look at the photo reference, they're not as dark. The darks that are in this aren't as dark as these. So I'm going to keep these as my darkest darks, I think. And this shape it's nice. I kind of like how this gray is kind of working with this red, but I want to add a little bit more of a red in there too, to show that the barn is showing a little bit through that foliage. Paint in that red a little bit again to kind of correct some of those little areas that are a little awkward looking. Nice thing about using a little small brush like this, once I have the big shapes in, is I can put in little touches of color vibrations. Like, for example, this shape of roof is kind of like a gray, a warm gray. It's a pretty warm gray, but I can put even warmer touches and have the edges on those shapes kind of hard. So it gives a little bit of a vibration in there and gives more of an effect of sunlight. having warms and cools bouncing off of each other. So I'll do the same thing I just did with that yellow, but I'll do it with a cooler color now on that same roof. And it will give the appearance that not only the light from the sun, but also the light from the sky is affecting this. And where there's sharp edges, sometimes I like to just mess them up a little bit. Once I know that I can get it right on, I'll mess them up a little bit, like right there. And over here, I'll just loosen up some of those edges to give it a more, I hate to say it, but more of an impressionist feel. So it doesn't look so forced on there. It kind of looks more airy, and it looks like I placed it down and it just kind of worked, and it's very loose. I didn't have to labor over these edges. And once those dry, I can go back in and crispen up a little spot on those edges that I just messed up. I'll leave some of it, but I'll adjust it a little bit to look better. So I haven't really put in my brightest bright yet, I don't think. I'm gonna go straight white and then just grab a touch of that yellow. I'm gonna put that in right here in a couple spots. That makes sense to me because this is where I want the attention, so it makes sense that I have my darkest darks and lightest lights right in here. And I have a lot of things pointing to in this direction. Might be cool to have a couple shadows where you can't see what they're coming from, but they are pointing into the scene. All right, so now I know that shadows are going to be coming off of these things, these objects that I made up, and they're going to be leading off to the left. The winter sun is pretty close to the horizon, so things that are vertical will catch the sun brighter than horizontal surfaces. So this snow right here it's a little bit darker in value compared to little forms, little like footprints and stuff in the snow that might catch that really bright white from the sun. Yeah, I can suggest how the snow might be sloping up a little bit as it hits these trees and things growing out of the ground. It actually does do that in the photo, but I don't want the road to be in there. Maybe the scene had some wind-swept snow drifts that kind of piled the snow up against these trees here. And maybe so this the snow right in here is going to be bright white. Give that cloud a little bit more of a sense of light. Whoops. One of the number one issues I see with people with gouache, they use too much water and they struggle to work with it because it's just out of control. I like how there's a little bit of the shadow side of the roof showing in that deep red. It's like a bluish gray showing right here. So just a little bit of that. I don't see it up there as much, but I think it'll help to have a little bit of it. When I wiped that with my wet paper towel, it picked up some of that red, so now I gotta go back in there and try to match that again. That's gonna be tough because that was a very specific red I mixed and it was very thin. So matching it again is gonna be tricky. So you can see it starts to dry and it darkens. So I'm gonna have to keep painting over that, trying to get it to read as a nice big shape. So I don't want it all just big shapes. Mostly big shapes. I want to think about the value in terms of that, but with focal point and interest, I have to think about smaller, more intricate areas that require a little bit more drawing to balance those large masses of value. It's really tough to get a red shape to look right, especially when it's your focal point, it's your main object in the painting. I struggle with it because the value of red is pretty dark. So you have the shadow and then you have the sunlit shape of the same object, and they're pretty close in value compared to other things like white. White is very bright, and then you have the shadows on the white, which can be very dark sometimes. But my point is, I had to darken the side of this barn more than I thought to make it read well with the shadow that I had on the edge there. So that was a big struggle, but it's getting closer now. splattered in those brighter shapes in this mass, it kind of overwhelmed the darks that I had in there. So I think I'll go back in and suggest a couple more of those. I'm getting close on this painting. It's starting to feel close to done. With a messed up brush, I can add in some natural looking twigs and some random growth in here without it looking too forced. If I kind of jam the brush against the surface of the palette a little bit, I get an uneven shape to the brush, like you can see there. Basically dry brushing, pushing the ends of the brush a little further apart. Yeah, using the brush to splatter is really helpful. It gives a random placement of brush strokes, and that can be really helpful if your whole painting is seeming really stiff and too organized in a way. I find that if I have a mass of value and it's too simplified, then splattering a little bit of randomness into it can help break that up and make it look a little bit more natural, like there's little bits of light that are sprinkling off of some branches, or maybe the siding is catching sunlight a little bit differently or something. I think it's very important to not be afraid to take chances. It can come in the form of seeing a spot in the painting that could be improved. For example, you may be hesitant because you like the way the brushwork looks, even though fundamentally it is lacking. I would recommend going for it and try any means to make it fundamentally correct. If it reads well from a distance and in a mirror, then up close the brushwork will be rewarding to the viewer. Yeah, instead of having all these shapes go right up in this direction, I think I should have at least one or two kind of slope down like that, and then again, I want that line to be there, but I want it to be broken up enough where it's not too obvious and it reads as natural and believable. It always bothers me when I see a house that has nothing planted around it. That house is just like perfectly sitting on top of the grass. I don't want that. I want there to be little suggestions of weeds and stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you got a few things out of this tutorial, and best of luck with your own painting. Again, you can check out the things I have to offer on my website, tadretz.com. I have a book out, as well as original paintings, a travel pochade box handmade by me, and some other cool stuff, all available on my website.